being away through that period of time. The team has also taken the approach of reducing the number of sailings, and I think that was reported to earlier select committees. So we have more outage periods for the maintenance of each ferry as they age. There's no doubt that as a ferry gets older, it will require more maintenance. We have had the international experts in looking at the asset management, done a detailed asset management plan for the fleet as a whole and for each individual ferry. Every component of the ferry that has the potential to fail has been taken through what's known as a bow tie analysis, which looks at potential causes of failure, the actual event, and then the remedies for those, introducing what's known as fracas, which is a systems engineering approach to each of these matters. So insofar as is practical, with the fleet we have a very sophisticated asset management system in place. The fact is that they are old ferries, and therefore there will be, they just have a greater potential prospect of failure in certain areas. Now, those failures are normally minor and they are detected, and you simply have to cancel a sailing. It's not great in terms of customer, but basically you're doing that, you're finding the fault and fixing it. And the one in the Sounds the other night was a classic example of a fault being found, detected, hold for a while, you fix it, and you sail and you're fine again.
Okay, what is...
Tony, can I just say, this is David Gordon, and this is Chris McKenzie. I should have pointed out which was which.
Sorry, I got that from your written introduction.
Well, it's there, but you can't tell just by that.
And you, one was so I assume the other was the other. But anyhow,
Just want to be helpful.
thank you, Minister.
We've seen Dave at least many times, and Chris, congratulations.
Can I ask, please, what is the budget for the maintenance of the current fleet?
I cannot give you that off the top of my head, but I do know that we are appearing in front of this committee in a week's time.
Okay, so you'll have that available.
And that answer will be available. And Duncan Roy, who is the head of Inter Island, will have those detailed numbers.
No problem. Thank you. Minister, we've just heard the reality is that there will be a reduction in sailings. There will be, from time to time, with a reduced number of vessels in the fleet, things that do happen, unfortunately. What is your expectation in terms of contingency to provide little to no disruption to the public around being able to use a resilient Cook Strait ferry service?
The ability to provide no disruption in the circumstance which we're operating, it would be just utterly over-optimistic. But there are contingencies to handle the difficulties we might face in the interim when we get ready for 2029.
What do you see those as?
Well, you don't answer.
Yeah, look, certainly.
No. I'd like, this is a serious issue around, contingency planning. As Minister, what do you see as your expectation around contingency? Do you expect, for example, that the public should have to put up with ongoing regular disruption to service?
One of the essential natures of leadership is that you pick people to do the job that you can trust to do the job, and you trust them to do the job, and that's why I've got Mr. Gordon here to answer the question.
Okay.
I think there's 2 points to do. Firstly, New Zealand's coming down to a 4-fleet ferry across the strait. That means our relationship with Bluebridge has to be very strong. We have to ensure, and it's a mutual thing. We can't have a situation where 2 of the 4 ships for the Cook Strait are in dry dock at the same time. So we will work and have worked closely with Bluebridge to ensure that we've got our dry dock and wet dock set up so that we're not at a stage where there's only 2 ferries operating. The next thing is both ourselves and Bluebridge have disruptions on occasions. We have a service which we do work with each other and say, if you've got an issue, then we'll take your customers and vice versa. It is an area where you'd call there is strong competition and sensible cooperation where there are events that can mutually affect us.
So an overt reliance on Bluebridge?
No, look, I think that's putting words in my mouth. We are basically, there are 4 ferries crossing the strait. The 2 operators cooperate in terms of outages, and we look after each other's customers in the event of there being an issue. It's just sensible commercial behaviour.
Can I, Minister, ask you about the provision for cancellation costs of the existing contract? Has there been a conclusion reached in terms of the repudiation of that existing contract?
I think I've said for some considerable time that we're in negotiations, and until we know the details, it would be most unwise to say anything about that.
So you can confirm that those negotiations have not concluded then? They're still ongoing?
Well, most certainly, that's a fact, yes.
Okay.
However, can I just say, reality was we began in May of 2020 with a $401 million proposal for 2 ferries. And when I finally got back, it was passed on Treasury's calculations and others, passing 4 billion. And where the cost of the ferries was going to be less than 20% of the total proposal. And so we were staring down the face of the Tasmania. We got the ferries, we got no infrastructure.
I note that, you just
How many more do you got?
one more on this
Okay,
one.
yeah, cool.
I know that your comments that are written here talk about the previous government on track to 4 billion, but it wasn't actually at 4 billion, was it?
It was at 3.1 at the time, but the Treasury's forecast said it could go past 4 to 4.2 billion.
If decisions were taken by that government at the time, those decisions were not taken. And so it's not accurate to suggest that that was something that could be taken.
No, the government had made the decisions. It had contracted for 2 ferries. The consequence was that the infrastructure would never been ready in the first place and was going to blow out way beyond any cost told to anybody in the public at the time. That's why the ferries were going to be, on the worst calculation, less than 20% of the total cost. We went out in May of 2020, when I was there as a minister, to buy 2 ferries and come back to find we bought a whole infrastructure cost with no accountability as to how we're going to get there and who's going to pay for it.
Okay.
And I'm actually astonished that anyone is seeking now at this belated hour to defend that decision.
Well, there's no defence. It's just pointing to the fact that, in your own language, you're saying was on track. This is a government that likes to talk about things being on track.
This time it's got a reality to it.
I guess there's an issue of where tracks go to. Can I just ask a couple of quick supplementaries? The first one of them is that the big areas of saving between IREX and what is now being proposed. And also I've put another part in that with the Aratiri. My understanding is talking to the Port of Marlborough that was pretty much attempting to do a live switch so keeping the Aratiri operating at one stage while trying to effectively use one wharf to switch or wharfing structure to switch between rail capable, non-rail capable, rail capable, non-rail capable, which came at a pretty sizable cost. So just interested, first of all, in that detail, but also in where the big savings are likely to come from, particularly the port infrastructure, which is required to support.
Well, others here are better able to answer the question than I, excepting what we've sought to do is to reuse as much of what is there now to fix up what has to be fixed up, and to end up with a more flexible system with 2 ferries that are actually going to have greater cargo capacity. Is that a bit fair summation?
Yeah. I think what I'd say is the design of the ferries and the infrastructure has been driven by Wellington, in that we are reusing what is the old dry dock wharf that the Aratiri comes into at the moment. And by using the existing alignment, the vessel itself is being designed for an off-centre rail load, which is used in Europe. And then we can use the same thing over in Picton. Picton is in a different position. The original infrastructure was built for the Aramoana. It's lasted through to now. That has to be replaced. And so in Picton, we will replace the link span to match that of Wellington with an off-centre load. We're making savings in other areas in that, apart from some tweaks to the rail yards in both ends, we can use the existing rail yard. IREX had a completely different plan for the rail yards in Picton in particular. The other area that we are saving money is in the marshalling areas for motor vehicles, both passenger and freight trucks. So we are using the infrastructure that is there. We are refurbishing, replacing some key infrastructure, which includes the link span. And apart from that, we're not doing anything else. There are no terminal buildings, so the existing Wellington terminal will remain. And in Picton, the temporary terminal that is there will continue until someone replaces that in the future. So that's where a lot of the savings are being made.
Because my understanding, when you said that sort of we were on track to have about 20% of the cost being the ferries themselves,
and the other 80% being the infrastructure that the lion's share of that was proposed to be in Wellington, with a much smaller share being at the Port of Marlborough.
Yep. The Port of Marlborough is a bigger project because we're basically rebuilding
it, yes.
the whole foreshore area.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You talk about savings in other areas being the onshore infrastructure. What's going to happen in Picton that will affect the township and others to actually build this infrastructure? How much are the people of Picton going to be displaced by having this work undertake, or is it minimal?
Picton is not going to be affected by our project at all, apart from the overbridge that was always planned for Dublin Street. All of the changes in the township of Higdon were done by IREX.
Okay.
And so we are not changing anything. We are using the existing railway line, the existing road access into the port, and the existing berthing structures.
I'm sure that people there will be happy to hear that. What proposals were floated for selling the Inter-Islander from the state books and having someone else run it? Why do we?
You would have to answer.
Minister, why was the decision made?
Well, the general notes there.
Yeah. Why was the decision made to?
Let me tell you why we're not making that decision. Because Booz Allen in its 89 Ford's report announced in 1992 that the turnaround of railways was seen in between 36 and 38 million that year, forward for the next year to 100 million and rising going forward. In October of that year, Parish got themselves made the financial advisor, and in April of the next year, 1993, they jumped across the other side of the table without tender and said, hello, we're the buyer with Wisconsin Central Railroad. And their shares blew out to 188 million in the 3 weeks when the public worldwide found out what had gone on. Then it went bust. Then we had to buy it back. So we're not going down that pathway again. We're going to build an asset that New Zealand people can be proud of and make it a seriously competitive business.
So when you say competitive, how are we going to measure the competitiveness against Bluebridge? Is Bluebridge going to be relying on any of this infrastructure that state will be providing, or is it going to be two standalone businesses that operate in a single market together to make sure dry dock infrastructure is being utilised properly?
Well, one of the main users of Bluebridge is Mainfreight, and he says this plan of ours is a no-brainer. He agrees totally that we need competition, but I'm talking about the big issue of railways across the board and the Inter-Islander. It's a serious business we're going to build, and we're going to be highly competitive, and that's a message from the bottom up.
The bottom up.
Yeah, we're going to the unions to say, we're going to save your jobs, we're going to save your futures, we're going to make sure you get the training you've got, but you've got to help us get there. We're in a business. And so certain things that you thought were the past entitlements put against, for example, Bluebridge's entitlement for their staff are going to be matched up, not in the way that you might think, but we want a fair go here because we're trying to save a critical industry in this country.
I think, colleagues, if we can manage to try and deal with the issues around the Inter-Islander first. And then
But I love the history
the
of
general
things
ferry.
here.
Sorry,
I love the history of things here because I don't want to make the same mistake again.
pretty good. Tracy.
Thank you. You're talking about negotiating with the union, and I know that you won't be able to provide any more details. I was just interested in that previous exchange. But due to the early withdrawal of the rail-enabled ferry, can you give us any information about what were the job losses based on that decision?
We're still in the negotiations with the union about that, but common sense suggests you go down from 3 ferries to 2, you have proportionate loss of jobs. The question really is whether there are people on the other ships, because people tend to stick with the ship, as opposed to floating between the different ships. There will be people on the K ships who may want to exit the business, and people on the Aotearoa who may want to stay around. So it is a bit more complex than simply saying one ship down, one crew gone, one set of crews gone.
And have you had any advice about concerns about ensuring requisite, amount of talent and skills and expertise, and whether this decision impacts the future of building it from the bottom up and maintaining those services and
I
skills?
think any decision that involves losing experienced staff brings in a certain amount of that risk. That is a risk that we have to manage. But I can't say that, you know, we will absolutely keep everyone who we really want to keep, and vice versa. We may lose some. On the other hand, there will be people who are on the Aotearoa who have the skills and desperately want to stay in the quick straight business. So we'd have to let that run its course through the union negotiations.
Gillian.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about retiring the Aotearoa several years before the replacement ships arrive. What impact is that going to have on rail freight between the North and South Island? Are you concerned about losing any customers during the time? Because clearly, and what will the impact be on the cost and time of moving containers by rail between the North and South Island, of doing the road bridging?
I can answer that in a little bit of detail, but I'd suggest, Julian, that we're in front of Select Committee in a week's time.
Right.
Duncan Roy, who is the GM of Inter-Island, who will give a far more comprehensive reply than I can. What I can say is we aim to fight to keep every customer we've got. We can only do that by giving good service, running on time, and the Inter-Island's on-time record is in fact really good. We're 100% reliability over Christmas, and we're in the very high 90s for reliability. We've got to offer a service. Sure, we would run. It's much more efficient to put it on and off by rail than it is to unload it, road bridge it across, and put it on. So that's why we're delighted we still have rail ferries coming into service. We just have to work hard to keep everyone, and that's it doesn't introduce extra costs. We're talking with the key customers about who should bear that cost for that period.
And what's the capacity of the ferries that will be running in the interim to carry containers relative to with the Aotearoa?
Well, we don't have rail freight capacity anymore, so we are taking we'll be using truck deck for the rail freight. For most of the year, we're not running at 100% full, so therefore we will be, the ferries will be fuller. It will be harder to get a slot on both ourselves and Bluebridge, simply because there is one ferry down. Having said that, there is sufficient capacity to carry the volume we currently carry.
Was there an option to run the Aotearoa longer?
No, and maybe Chris can answer this a little bit better, but the port build program that is in place requires the Aotearoa dock to go. So there is no choice. And Aotearoa is not configured internally to be able to load lots of freight because it doesn't have an internal ramp. So it's just not suited to be a roll-on, roll-off freight ship.
And when the replacement ferries, which are still not under contract, right? I mean, do we have a contract for the replacement ferries yet?
No, as I said, we said in the paper, there are bidding outs, and when the matter's finalised later in the year, we'll let you know immediately.
So, but can you guarantee that they will be rail-enabled roll-on?
Well, look, with respect, this is as clear as daylight. It's been here for months. It's going to be rail-enabled.
Okay.
That's what this whole talk, the conversation and option was always about.
Do you know what
We don't put out press statements for a joke. We put it out because we mean business.
Any more? Can I just ask one question on that? Because when I met with the Port of Marlborough last time I met with them, they said that to keep the Aotearoa operating, it was that basically it was a live wharf. If you'd have one wharf, every single sailing, they'd have had to rearrange the ingress egress to the vessel, and they put that cost at, I won't say it's the cost of a new ship, but over the time, it would half the cost of an entire new ship to do that. Is that your understanding? It's probably.
The issue with the Aotearoa is quite simple. Picton intend to lift their link span as early as October because they have, as I said earlier, they have to do their whole foreshore rebirth. So we'd have a ship sitting in Wellington, but it couldn't go anywhere. And so the Aotearoa is coming out of service. It lines up with the need for the Aotearoa to go off for a dry dock. That wouldn't be in any way sensible because it would come back and one end wouldn't be operating. So in Picton, the Aratiri dock and the Aratiri going means that we can demolish the long arm that the Aratiri lines up against at the moment, because that's where the new dock comes in, and you can't do that while you've got an active ship. Picton's got the issue of it's got the Blue Bridge just on the other side of that, and it's got the K boats on the other side. So the only way that we can progress and prevent a Tasmanian type issue is to take the Aratiri out of service so that they've got a clean workspace.
We might be able to sell it to Tasmania because they've got 2 ferries. They've got 2 ferries in their infrastructure. Does this sound familiar? Has this got a ring about it? Right.
But I mean,
Just the last point I'd make on that is,
Like the original.
the other reason the Aratiri can't stay is that the Aratiri, unlike the 2 K boats and the Blue Bridge boats, don't have internal ramps. And so any access onto the rail deck can't get anywhere else. And there's no way you'd put stuff on the top. One of the advantages of the vessels that we're designing is that if there's no railway, it can still be used as a RoPax boat. A RoPax boat can't be used as a rail boat. So in fact, we're getting flexibility in the vessel that we're looking at.
Julianne.
oh, well, I suppose that the timing would have been really good if we'd got the original ships in and online by 2026. There wouldn't be this disruption to rail enablement of 4 or
Well, hang
5
on.
years if the
How are we
project
going to build
carried
the
on.
infrastructure in time? This is exactly what happened in Tasmania.
Well, I think
You
if
got the boats, but
IREX
you haven't
hadn't
got
been
the-
cancelled, we would have had the infrastructure and we would have had boats.
RS, can you show me the Ford program that underwrites that? That you had prepared at the time when you made that decision?
Well, I wasn't the
Well, that's,
decision
no,
maker,
no, no,
but
no, well, these are what are the alternatives are. Can you show me the Ford construction program that would have delivered that on that? And with inside the cost that you said at the time you made the forecast.
I was never the Minister of Finance. I wish I had been. Maybe I could have made some better decisions, like yourself would have. But I think it is the case that we're going to see some disruption to KiwiRail's business in terms of moving freight between North Island and South Island, because we have at least a 4-year or 5-year gap of not having a rail-enabled ferry. And it'd just be interesting to know if you can quantify the cost or the impact on that, or whether it's just something we have to wait and see what the impact is.
I think some will be a wait and see, but as I said, I think it's a question better directed at the GM of Inter-Islander in a week's time.
Tony, you had a question on
Yes.
the intro. We'll try and deal with all the Inter-Islander questions in one hit, and then we'll move to other parts of the rail business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, Minister, I appreciate that you've had to come in and basically clean up the mess that Nicola Willis has left around ferries here.
No.
And you yourself,
So,
talked
excuse me,
about.
I'm not gonna settle for that sort of preliminary to your question. with
Well,
respect.
let me put
This
it,
is a select committee and I'm entitled to have my response to what you say.
let me put it this way.
But maybe phrase it slightly
You,
differently.
you have indicated that you have used your skillful diplomatic skills on a visit to Hyundai, which may have gone smoother if the Minister of Finance, Nicola Willis, had not perhaps led to, relationships being established or communicated by way of text messages and those sorts of things. Given that you have indicated that delivery will be 2029 at the earliest, what gives confidence that everything is going to be on track for a 2029 delivery?
The international circumstances of business competition is seriously heightened now. There's greater reasons for companies to make a commitment and deliver on it than there ever was. It's not easy to do business, it's harder. And so one of the reasons why I do think our conversations with Hyundai went well is not only have we paid them the proper respect, but they are interested in the business.
And I think that respect bit is very, very important. In your opening remarks, there is reference around the commercial matters and not touching on the details of that. However, the intention is that a contract will be signed later this year. Can I just ask that the question is everything on track, and is there some confidence in basically being able to sign that contract with whoever the preferred provider will be at that time? Maybe that's a question.
The answer to that is yes. The ship's program director, along with 3 international partners because we don't have maritime lawyers and shipbrokers and so forth in New Zealand. They have visited the 6 shortlisted shipyards that we advised previously that there were 6. All 6 shipyards have given an undertaking that they will deliver in Q1, Q4 of 2029, provided a contract is signed between Ferry Holdings Limited, the government and the shipyard by the end of this year. We are aiming at the moment to be slightly ahead of that, and we are slightly ahead of it at the moment in that a result of those visits, the information is already coming back into Ferry Holdings on what their detailed proposals are.
So from Ferry Holdings' perspective, you're confident, Minister, one of the partners that do need to sign up on that is the government. From your perspective, are you confident that the government is on track to be able to hold up its end of that particular bargain?
Look, I'm not trying to duck your question because it's an interesting question. But if somebody got before you and said to give you absolute guarantee, that person wouldn't know anything about business. But am I confident that we're doing the maximum we can in the climate we can to get a contract? Yes, I am.
Can I just ask about sequencing? So you're in the process of negotiating now. Do you think there will be, once we have the ships or like the contract for the ships and the design, some need for investment in port side infrastructure that will be related to the final design of the ships? Or can you make decisions about that without having the contract for the ships?
Well, look, we already have, but perhaps you could answer that.
We are not signing a contract for the ships until we have the commercial arrangements with the 2 ports. And so we do not want A, to get into a Tasmanian situation, or B, get into a situation where we have a vessel that can berth in Wellington, but we haven't finished Picton. So we are working with the 2 ports, along with KiwiRail, on ensuring that when we go to a contract with a shipyard, we have the same confidence in the 2 ports delivering the berth for the 2 ferries.
And is the expectation that the ports will fund any changes to portside infrastructure?
The commercial arrangements for the ports are still being negotiated, and so until that's finalised, we won't be giving any numbers on either what the Crown or the ports are contributing.
So the answer is yes, but to what degree? We cannot at this point disclose.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, and perhaps this was covered earlier, but in terms of the previous contract with Hyundai, has there been a cancellation or a break fee that we've had to pay with it?
We've had that.
Yeah.
Well, but part of the Hyundai operation cost, some of the utilities have been saved for our future purpose. And that's not being factored in by a lot of people talking about the total cost.
So what would you put the total cost at right now?
Oh, well, let's say we're in negotiations.
Okay.
Do you know anything about business? You announce the deal when you're completed, not 1 minute before.
Can I just ask, no, so Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister and David and Chris. Related to the previous questions, if we fast forward a year from now, what for New Zealanders, what can they expect in terms of key decisions that have been made by yourself, Minister, or Cabinet regarding port infrastructure, regarding the ferries? Give us a sense of what New Zealanders may be able to have confidence in. I know with respect to your comment about business, it might be difficult, but fast forward, give us a sense of key decisions and milestones that you're working to.
Can I say, I'll ask one of my witnesses here to answer that question. If you say fast forward for a year, no, fast forward for half a year, because that's the level of
Yes.
programming we've got out of this framework again.
Yep. In answer to that, there will be a ship's contract and there will be a commercial deal done between the 2 ports. And that is the major decision of Ferry Holdings. Ferry Holdings may very well look different in 18 months' time because we will be in the process then of the construction, the ships will be being constructed and so forth. And so there may be a slightly different configuration to Ferry Holdings itself. So there will be no decisions post the end of this year that will need to be made by either Ferry Holdings or the government. There will be some other options that we will be looking at. We'll be working with KiwiRail and Inter-Islander on the operational requirements of the two ports along with the vessel. Inter-Islander will be closely involved in the layout and so forth within the ships. But apart from that, once those contracts are signed, then it's all hands to the pump to actually get the things done.
Great.
And the other point to make is it's up to the two ports to deliver, but very closely working with Ferry Holdings. So,
Yes.
as I say, there's no major decisions, but it will be all hands to the pump, which includes the two ports and the shipyards.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And I was going to ask that just one question there on the ports. So what I'm hearing is that you pretty much got the ports, you've worked out with the ports what it is that they need to look like. In other words, what the physical arrangements are, and then it's about the commercial arrangements behind that. Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on the ports, Wellington will look very much as it is at the moment. There'll be a slight change to the rail because the new vessels under Solus, their freeboard has to be higher, and so the link span has to be adjusted. Trains don't like steep hills, and so there will be a slight change to the rail alignment as it comes onto the vessel. In Picton, it will be a new infrastructure, but it will be roughly where the current infrastructure is. And it will still be dual loading rail and trucks below and cars and trucks above at both ends.
Okay. Are there any other questions on Inter-Islander? Okay, I'm going to do one question, which is sort of transfers us from Inter-Islander quite neatly, I think, into the rail network. And that is, first of all, the value to the Inter-Island line and indeed to any other lines, but particularly to the Inter-Island line, of having a dry dock, because you mentioned dry and wet docking, in New Zealand. Obviously, I'm talking about Northport. So that's the first part of the question, is what does that look like in terms of value for Inter-Islander as a business? And the second part is, how are we going in terms of delivering the rail line to Marsden Point to support that? And are there any issues around, making sure we've got all the land and the design and all those sort of things sorted out? Because I understand there is some small issue there.
Well, actually, I was alarmed to see on television New Zealand a statement out of Takahiwai, or the Takahiwai people in that part of Marae, that their land was being taken off them for this construction of a railway between Oakley and Marsden Point. What was astonishing about that was it dramatically wasn't true, and they haven't even made the effort, TV1, to find out the facts. Amongst other things, the Minister of Rail is actually connected to that Marae and knows the complainant's parents and uncle who used to be on the Whangarei Council.
Sure, that'll get sorted out then.
No, it's not the point. There's TV1 running this full-scale story about the land being taken off them when all the documentary evidence is of them being told in 2020 that this is not going to happen. That this meeting was consulted on then, and by 2023, all the advice was, no, it's not going to happen. We've found an alternative route, so we will not be touching your land at all. So there's TV1, owned by the taxpayer, running a story that's total fiction and damaging to railways. And railways is utterly here an innocent party.
And the value of the dry dock to the Inter-Island line?
I think it's immense at the present. In a way, it's astonishing that New Zealand, as a maritime nation, doesn't have a dry dock. We have in the past been using both Sydney and Singapore. Sydney dock gives preference to entry ahead of civilian ships, and you can be bumped at any notice. Now, you can't run a scheduled ferry service if you've got something booked and then it sits outside. So we have to steam up to Singapore, and through that excellent service, really high technology, etc. But to have a dry dock in New Zealand would be of great value to us. We'd, excuse the pun, be an anchor customer.
Thank you. Okay,
Can I
opening up
say-
further questions. Yeah, go for it. Yep.
Just on that, has there been any advice sought around dry dock and potential costings for that as a proposal?
The dry dock is being driven by MB. It's not something being driven either from Transport or KiwiRail itself. We've been providing advice about, well, how big would it need to be and the rest of that, but not in terms of that. It's not our project, unfortunately.
Try dock.
Can I just say, going forward, if you look at shipping and listen to the experts like Maersk and others, Tauranga has got a temporary purpose, but the big one in the future is Northport because of its depth and its land area. And for what it's worth, it's up to this committee to make its own decisions here. But a briefing from Maersk as the future transport needs of this country on the water wouldn't be the worst idea. I mean, these people are serious international experts.
Well, we will know, I think, that we are, as a committee, we've resolved to conduct an inquiry into the maritime sector and ports. Maersk will certainly be one of those organisations we want to be talking to. Absolutely. I think I had a sup over here and a sup over there.
No, that was my sup. I have a new line.
Okay,
in rail, but
well, dry dock, okay, away we go.
Oh, no, mine's not dry dock. It's
Okay, right. Are
it's
there
a
any other subs?
rail and inter-island ferry related.
I thought we dealt with it.
I know, it's a bridging one.
Last one on Inter-Islander, and then I've got I've used Cam and then.
Mr. Chair,
Okay.
I've been
So hang on, wait.
requesting
So-
questions since the first minutes of the meeting, but I don't know why my pecking order being delayed.
No, I was trying to deal with the Inter-Islander first. It's okay, we'll get there. We'll finish that Inter-Islander and then we'll come over back here.
I just wanted to know if KiwiRail is going to have any issues with maintaining and doing various work on the network, not having a rail-enabled ferry for the next few years. Do you have like equipment and whatnot that needed to move on a rail-enabled ferry during that time?
We do have some equipment that has to get across there. Most of it we are moving at the present moment, so it'll be gone before
I'll go over here.
there. We'll be moving our new tampers down there. The key things that we'll have to move basically on deck are our track measurement cars. For the rest, with the investment of the depots, we've got enough that we can run basically a 2-island railway for the period.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Carlos, I'll give you a question now.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question to the minister is, why does rail maintenance in New Zealand, especially in Auckland, often require such an extended period of service disruption? Where else in other countries, similar maintenance appear to be carried out more efficiently with minimum impact on service. Are there any specific challenge in New Zealand that makes shorter maintenance window more difficult to achieve?
Well, right across the board, that's been a chronic condition of New Zealand for too many years, and our job is to turn that around.
So from your point of view.
I'm talking about the roads. Where else did you go? And the tracks, everything here is on a delayed base or taking downtime. Where else do you see cones everywhere? You go around the rest of the world, everywhere. No one's got cones. Only one country called New Zealand has got a plethora of them everywhere. Then when it comes to getting work done, it's sort of sometime never. When some of it should be 24-hour crisis emergency stuff. I can go to the Christchurch rebuild. It's working 8 hours a day compared to the urgency that was required. We have got to turn this country's psychology around.
Yeah, so if you say like that, like from your point of view, what is the accepted period of time of service being disrupted in order to do a maintenance job in just, 3 station or 3 section of the road being, the rail being repaired? Or put it that way, do you think 3 months to 6 months?
Restoration of the previous status quo at the greatest speed possible.
Because like my question for a lot of Aucklander will be like, the rail service is being stopped for 3 to 6 months. Do you think that's acceptable?
Well, to be honest with you, we're trying to do a rejuvenation of a lot of industries in this country, and rail is one of them, because we believed in its essentiality. We're committed to it as ever it was. We've got the same inspiration that Vogel had in the 1870s when he set out to build more in 10 years than for the next 130 years with horse and cart. Yeah, we've got our sights set on a far better performing rail industry in this country.
So I got a second question on that was much easier question. A second harbour bridge crossing have been, being discussed. Do you see the possibility of including a rail or train service across the harbour, or given the needs of more sustainable or efficiency transport option, Is there any being seriously considered as part of the long-term infrastructure?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, but when the prospect between the two old parties was 3 tunnels, 2 under the harbour and 1 on the North Harbour, that are not costed, of course, and the other one with no sort of plan at all. I'm just not being critical here, but no real plan. To us, to afford plan a railways when there's no plan, it's slightly difficult.
Forgiveness.
Okay, Tony, and then Ken.
Those questions shouldn't come off allocation for opposition parties, although those sort of questions we'd ask.
What we're doing our job as an MP here.
Well, at least we like having questions that are being good questions that are being asked.
Nice. Minister, there is an investment in rail in budget 2025 that looks at metro investment for rail for Auckland and for Wellington. But there's nothing for what is, the golden triangle as they call it, yet that is in the government's GPS on land transport. So what can we expect to see in terms of investment in the golden triangle, given that that's not, as I understand it, connected to the rail metro budget provisions that were announced?
KiwiRail is funded for the rest of the network through what is known as the Rail Network Improvement Project.
ANIP, yeah.
ANIP, that comes via NZTA through the National Land Transport Fund. However, let's call it the funding of that fund is through the Crown, and that fund is being voted, and a decision's shortly to come from Minister Bishop on the exact value of that. At this stage, we will be able to show once that is made the split of investment. Money will always be going into the Golden Triangle. It is an important part of our, it is the most revenue earning part of our network at the present moment. But I will make the point that that's been the case for about 15 years. So things like bridges, which are really expensive, and we've rebuilt elements of the Kaimai Tunnel, we've already done the bridges, etc. So the big lumps of capital expenditure required for the rail maintenance in that area have actually been done. So relative to its earning, it is actually having a little less invested because it simply doesn't need as much. But we are funded for the rest of the network, confident that funding is sufficient to deliver what we wish to do.
So the GPS was basically signed off by the government last year. So you then saying that if the GPS does include the Golden Triangle as an area for improvement and targeted investment in rail, we would expect to see those decisions flow through the ANIP process rather than the budget that was announced.
Yes, it is in the ANIP, in the prioritisation of ANIP dollars.
And we look forward to
where it is being spent by geographic area, by risk, and also in certain areas by the quality of the asset.
Okay.
And the point I'm making about the Golden Triangle is that relative to the rest of the network, its asset quality is high.
Thank you. Minister, obviously the Hillside opening that you attended in open and previous governments have been part of specific funding for that upgrade there. What plans do you have in the sense of inter-regional rail connectivity, particularly in the South Island in terms of investment?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Hillside in previous goals, but you didn't tell us the framework and the shape and the character of that previous government who made the commitment to fix it up in the first place.
So I said governments plural.
Success has many fathers, failures are often, and I can't believe how many fathers railways is getting now. But anyway, my colleagues can answer that second part of your question.
I'm not sure whether you're referring to freight interconnectivity or passenger.
A bit of both, actually. I mean, what we're looking for, I think, as a country is an upgrade to investment in rail. So are there plans around inter-regional connectivity, not just for freight, but passenger service?
Let's talk about the freight first. So the South Island's got 3 quite distinct markets. The first is across the Alps, which is basically coal, coking coal, not thermal coal, and also dairy, and that's quite a distinct and discrete market through there. So the future of that coal export is very much dependent on the mining licenses that are associated with that and the duration of those licenses, because at some point we'll have to reinvest in the coal fleet itself, and that takes a long time to amortise. So there's a 3-way going there between ourselves, Bathurst and Port of Lyttelton to sustain that. The The second market in the South Island is the Auckland Christchurch market, that basically domestic, which flows a little bit down through to Dunedin. That stands alone. And then the third is the export market, which is predominantly dairy, but also meat. And you've got the situation that's set up at Mosgiel and other places. So the South Island's is in a good state. Dairy's going gangbusters. It's coming on rail. So the South Island's pretty good for there. With respect to passenger, let's look at it through two lenses. The first is the tourism lens, and both those services are going extremely well. While passenger volumes are slightly down, the yield from passengers is way up. We have introduced a premier product on those trains, effectively equivalent of travelling first class on an airline. That is going extremely well, and people will pay the premium to do that. If we look at commuter rail, there is the proposal from within Christchurch for the Rolleston, for services Rolleston and through to the north. That is something that's in its nascent stages. We'll see how that turns out, and obviously it's been promoted by the local councils, as was done with Te Huia, and we'll obviously give them the support they need to take that through to business case. We've also had the Southerner running on occasions. Now that actually went really well, but you never know whether a one-off is going to translate to something that's the same as day in, day out. And the team will be looking at options for that. Maybe we do turn about with the Coastal Pacific, etc. And that's something which we're exploring. It got a very good pickup. But as I say, whether that translates into a sustainable thing as opposed to an event, hard to know.
That's fine. Just one sub on that for the Minister. Given the return of the Southerner service, is that something as Minister that you would like to see investment directed towards to ensure that connection between Christchurch and Dunedin?
Yes, seriously, yes.
Yes?
Yeah. But also, don't overlook the fact that there's a whole lot of employment being reoffered to New Zealanders when the situation looked hopeless, when we were downsizing. It's turned around now. We're building a whole lot of our own equipment ourselves, both in the North and the South Island. I think that's fantastic.
Supplementary. Yeah.
Thank you. Just on the freight, thank you for that breakdown in the South Island. It's encouraging. I'm just wondering about the statement of corporate intent for KiwiRail. Will that, I know that's pending, will that reflect a focus on freight and, what's your expectations there?
I simply can't answer that until the statement of corporate intent has been approved by ministers. It's not something I can comment on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think I had, was it SUP on this one? Yeah, okay.
You talked about the Rolleston to Rangiora business case and it being modelled on Te Huia. Auckland to Hamilton population slightly different than Rolleston to Rangiora. How, I don't want to preempt, obviously you're just at the very, very beginning of agreeing to look at developing a business case. But does that, so KiwiRail's happy to partner with the local regional councils to establish
what
that?
we've said is that if they come for us for information as to what it would cost, what the train paths, etc. would be, then we will absolutely help them provide that. Ultimately, the running for these regional services has to be made by those regional councils. And with all these regional services, we're supportive, but the stance we take is we want to make sure people go into it with their eyes wide open as to what it will cost and what, if it grows, what the growth path is and what path is and what the investment for that growth path is. I think we just don't want to go on optimistically.
Asking on behalf of Christchurch,
I'm
we'd
sure
be
you
very
are.
excited to see some movement in that direction.
Can I just ask a question on that? So, because in the Wellington region, we've got the Capital Connection, or you might argue the Wairarapa line as well, but which are slightly longer distance, but are run in one of them by KiwiRail, one by Metlink. Auckland Te Huia is run, or Auckland Hamilton Te Huia is run by KiwiRail on behalf of, effectively on behalf, subsidised by, bit by the Crown and bit by the region. It's a bit of a mixture. Have you got any observations on just what's the right model to run these kind of, and we're talking about Christchurch and et cetera. Is there an optimal model around these, the way in which these things are run?
One of my colleagues can answer that question.
Right.
We're working on it. That's the reality. We're trying to get ready by the end of this year with the optimal model.
That's the MROM model. I think generally, if you have a passenger service which is coming into a centre, it's better that it is integrated with the thing. So it probably makes more sense for something like the Metlink brand to contain the lot. And certainly the investment in regional trains you would see being more likely run under the Metlink brand than KiwiRail doing a bit of it and someone else doing the other.
So it makes Auckland a bit of an outlier in terms of Te Huia not being run the AT brand sitting on it. And they've not been terribly supportive of it. It's been Waikato that's driven it. It's like a big smile there.
Yeah, it had to get going some way. I think the Te Huia is an interesting one because it is diesel hauled, and that means it cannot fully integrate with the Auckland network as a whole. Basically, it can't go into the City Rail link, and in fact, it stops at Strand. So until you've got something that can actually be part of the whole, you can make sense of it being slightly disaggregated.
Okay, so Julian.
There was money in the budget last year, I believe, for a business case for electrification of the North Island main trunk and possibly out to Tauranga. Where's that at?
Our objective is to bring that proposal back around December. We've made very good progress on that case.
Can I ask the minister if he's supportive of full electrification and what benefits that could bring both to passenger and
I'm
freight?
supportive of every smart idea that works and totally opposed to stupid ideas that are experiment.
Okay.
Cam.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about how does KiwiRail's, how do you see, it might surprise people that NZTA is the regulator, but it makes a lot of sense for the rail safety team. How do you find working with their rail safety regulation team? Do you think that they have sufficient knowledge? They have the expertise that goes back in some cases to locomotive licensing? I'd be interested to hear how you feel about that.
It looks like somebody was very keen to answer.
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, the NZTA rail regulation and NZTA, the funder, it is in a way a slightly odd coexistence within the one organisation. They manage that separation extremely professionally. We work with them. We have strong conversations with them on occasion. There are people within there who have deep rail knowledge who we respect and have those discussions. The relationship between a regulator and an operator has always got to be slightly arm's length, and I think it's appropriate.
Cool. So, I mean, you guys being the largest rail operator in New Zealand, you have some knowledge and ability to deal with the regulatory team. Do you think that someone who's operating, say, a small business for tourism purposes on a line that's not used by anybody else should be facing the same hurdles that you are? Say, one of the groups in New Zealand that do tours on no longer used rail lines, they should be facing the same level of regulation.
That's an interesting question. On the issue of safety, yes, the answer is precisely the same sort of restrictions on safety. But on other issues, well, now you're talking about a political decision on charge to this or returns to the state. And those are ideas that obviously a forward-looking government would be prepared to consider because you want to use the utilities that are there to the max if you can.
Yeah.
Because if you can take people from on a tourism venture, you're taking somebody who's there for a break and holiday, but you also bring commerce with them because they become patrons and customers and clients in small towns or in holiday areas. So yeah, I think we've got to have a very open mind about that.
It's good to hear you say that, Minister, and supporting the reasons that you do.
Can I add to that? The one other thing you've got to remember is that lines like Glenbrook, Wicked Pass, Dunedin Rail, actually for periods of the year carry more passengers than KiwiRail carries. And so you have got the same number or increased numbers, and they require the same sort of safety as running on a main trunk line. And
Of
so,
course, the question's about the ability of smaller companies to be able to resource that, but that's fine. The other question that I had, do you feel that Railways is a good partner when negotiating new amounts for license to occupy land? That's land that a farmer or a business owner, or even a council is having to manage or look after next to the railway line?
Yeah, I believe that we are. We are required to take a commercial approach to our land holdings and earn revenue from that. We have a number of leases. The bulk of our leases are close to grace and favour, very low rental, just occupy a bit of the corridor. But it takes some management to do it. When it is a fully commercial lease for a piece of, for an area of land, which could be used for other things, I think we're entitled to charge a commercial rent.
Of course, and you should. But how do you measure what you're doing? How do you compare it? What sort of policies have you got in place to make sure that that is a fair commercial rate?
I guess it's a market and it's a competitive market. People either pay it or they don't.
It's often not a competitive market. We're talking about a piece of land that's isolated behind another piece of land. Often there's only one potential leaser. So what's the sort of process in place to manage that?
Well, the counterfactual is if we aren't able to lease it, we don't get the income. So we've got the incentive to reach an agreement as well.
We are at time. Thank you very much for answering all the questions. Good interchange, and really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It might be worth considering, when we get things sorted out, for the committee sometime in the next 12 months, go down to the Sounds and go down to the North and see what we're doing.